right, what's up, everybody? Hey there. We've got Josh Fairhurst, and he is talking about failure and success. Oh, I guess I was a little loud. I screamed. So, Josh, take it away.
Hey, everybody. So I'm Josh Fairhurst. I'll go over some background on myself in my slideshow. I'm going to do my best to fill the whole hour here, but I have a habit of running really fast for these virtual conferences, so bear with me here. So the talk today is Failure is Not the End, and that's From Failure to Fortune is my subtitle there. I apologize in advance. The slideshow is not super visual, so a lot of text might be a little boring, but yeah, apologies in advance for that. So here's some background on myself. I am the co-founder of Mighty Rabbit Studios, which is a local indie developer. We're based out of Apex, North Carolina. We have existed for 11 years now. We started in 2010 when I had just graduated from college. I was kind of in a lucky spot and managed to find some small funding to start my company. And I took it and started working on my first game, Saturday Morning RPG. After that, my company made a game called Breach and Clear, and then we released a game called Breach and Clear Deadline. We've done a few things after that, but these are the 3 games that we developed entirely ourselves. Before I started Mighty Rabbit Studios, I had worked in the game industry a little bit. I started in 2008 as a tester at Epic Games. I worked on Gears of War 2 while I was a junior in college. I would not recommend trying to work at a AAA company on a huge title like that while you're also balancing a full course load in college. I was doing about 90-hour work weeks for, I think, about 2.5 months straight, while also trying to do all of my classes in college. So needless to say, I ended up needing an extra semester of college. But I pulled through that, and I enjoyed the experience of working in the game industry. And I'm really proud of that game that I worked on at Epic. Gears of War 2 is one of the best third-person shooters ever made, in my opinion. After starting Mighty Rabbit Studios about 2015, I founded a company called Limited Run Games. And at Limited Run Games, I've led the publishing of over 750 different physical products for a huge variety of platforms. So basically, if it's a current platform, I've published on it outside of Xbox because of Microsoft. But I have published games for PS3, PS4, PS5, Vita, PC, retro consoles, Nintendo Switch, 3DS, Wii U. The list really goes on and on. So that's my background there. At this point, that is 13 years in the game industry, which is kind of crazy to think about. When I first started out, I thought I wouldn't even make it past 5, but here we are. So why talk about failure? Most people tend to talk about success when they do talks like this, and it's because I think people normally want to hear about success. And I'm going to talk a little bit about success, but success is usually rooted in failure. You know, you're going to fail a lot before you get to success. And everybody's going to fail. It's a commonality. Like, we're going to fail at some point. If you haven't already failed, you're going to at some point. And if you've already failed, then you've already failed. So, you know, we all have that in common. At some point, we're going to fail. And I feel like failure is a better thing to talk about because it's replicable. If I tell you how I failed, you can go and fail in the exact same way. I don't know why you would, but you know, if you decide that you want to go follow in my footsteps and fail at all the things that I've failed at before, it's totally possible. But if I tell you how I became successful, you know, you can't necessarily just copy that and then be successful. Like, you have to find your own path to success. But, you know, you might as well avoid some failures on your way there. You're going to fail in different ways. So, you know, I'm going to go over the failures that I encountered and failures that I went through before getting to success. And really, I want to motivate people to not give up when they hit failure, because there was a point where I was about to give up and just close everything down. And if I had done that, I never would have made it to success. So sometimes success can be right within your reach. Even if you failed multiple times, success might just be right around the corner, and you don't want to just give up. So I'm hoping that this talk will inspire some people to keep going despite failures, despite shortcomings. So here's some backstory. I just talked about this a little bit, but at 5 years old, Mighty Rabbit Studios was almost shut down completely. We had very little money left in the bank account. And I actually sat every single person down in the company and I told them, like, hey, we need to look for other jobs. Like, we're not going to last for more than another month. And it was really hard. I had 8 employees at the time, and they had worked with me for the better part of that 5 years. And we had all really worked hard and really pushed to be successful as a company. But, we kept hitting roadblock after roadblock, and we just felt like we were at the end of the road. And I even went so far as to get a job teaching as kind of my backup thing. If Mighty Rabbit Studios was going to shut down and game development wasn't going to work out, I was just going to get a job being a teacher because I also enjoyed that. So I was kind of really committed to the idea that things weren't going to work out, but turns out that they actually did work out. We ended up not giving up, and we kept pushing. And now Mighty Rabbit Studios and myself are in a better place than ever before. And we're 11 years in, which is crazy to think about. When we started the company, almost everybody we talked to said, your company's not going to make it past 5 years old. That's kind of a thing that a lot of people will say, most people don't make it past 5 years in the game industry. But here we are, 11 years later. Insane to think about. So I'm going to kind of go over some of the failures that I've made one by one. The first failure that we made was a pretty critical one that I really didn't think about. And that was that we put no real deep thought or consideration into the initial terms of investment that we got for our company. So when we started Mighty Rabbit Studios, there was an incubator in the area called Joystick Labs. They've since, dissipated, but they were funding indie game companies on concepts. So I didn't have to have strong experience or, multiple titles to my name. I was able to, pitch the game that we wanted to make and convince them to kind of fund on that. But I really didn't think about the terms in relation to how much money we were getting. And we ended up giving up the vast majority of the revenue on that title for a very small amount of money up front. Granted, I couldn't have started the company without that money. So, I understand that trade-off, but for $20,000, we gave up 50% of the revenue from our project. And when you think about that, the only way you can survive after you release your first game is the revenue from that project. So to get over a hurdle of somebody else taking 50% of that revenue, it's almost insurmountable. It's like the terms were set up to just like make these companies go out of business, basically. I don't know if they're really set up that way, but it feels like that because, if we only make $50,000 on a game, 25,000 is going to go to these other people, and we're only going to have 25,000 to make the next project on, and that's not enough. The revenue just really didn't work out, and it made the barrier for continuing after that first title so unreasonably high that we almost couldn't get over that. So that was kind of our first failure, and our first real struggle was, how are we going to fund ourselves when half of the money is going somewhere else? And that doesn't even take into account that, most people, when they're publishing their first game, they need a publisher to support it as well. So not only is a publisher going to take money, then you're going to get money taken out by the investors. And that really hurt because it was just, by the end, the money that was trickling in just could not support us. So if I could go back, I would put a lot more thought into the terms that I was accepting up front. And I really would have fought against that revenue share because it was set up in a way that was really built to make it hard for us to survive. Like the only way we could have survived is if we had a giant hit at the time. If we had released a game that, was a Fall Guys or an Among Us. Among Us didn't even do well until later on. So if they had these terms, like they wouldn't even exist at this point by the time the game picked up. So that's not even really a good example. But Fall Guys right out of the gate, that did a ton of money. And games like that, they can get over a hurdle of somebody taking 50% of the revenue, but we really couldn't. Failure number 2 for us was chasing trends. And I would not recommend chasing trends. That's something that I've learned at this point, is that you need to pursue your passion. You need to pursue the things that you really like and enjoy. You can't just look at other games and say, hey, we should do what they're doing and, put this spin on it or whatever. At the time, when we were starting Mighty Rabbit, the big thing was mobile games. Angry Birds had just made a ton of money in 2010 and everyone was chasing mobile. They were like, millions of dollars there. It's going to make tons of money no matter what you put out. As long as it's a good game, it's going to make money. And it turns out that wasn't true because everybody chases trends. Once Angry Birds made millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of other people decided we're also going to chase this gold rush on mobile. And that ended up creating a glut in the market, a flood of games, and nobody could get exposure. Nobody could get players' attention. And that really hurt. Because when we were going into this, we could have, focused on PC. We could have focused on Steam for our first project. And Steam wasn't a hot thing right then. It wasn't like, a buzz thing. It was 2010. And Steam was still a bit of a walled garden. There wasn't a lot of games on there. If we had gone to Steam instead of chasing this trend of mobile, we would have been one of those early games on Steam when, you could release anything on there and you would make a ton of money. And we just ignored Steam. We had an open invite to release on there back then, and we decided mobile would be better, and that was a huge mistake. The other trend at the time was free to play. Nobody wanted premium games. Nobody wanted to pay money for a game, so it was all about free to play models. You get something free, and then you support it through microtransactions or IAPs, in-app purchases, and this model, it requires tons of research to hone and figure out and really understand what drives players to buy things and what really pushes them to spend money on your game. And without those strong hooks and that strong research and all of these kind of scummy, almost psychological hooks, your game really can't succeed super well. So we made our game free to play, and we had a 1 hour or so episode that you could play for free, and then the model is you pay for the rest of the episodes of our game. And some backstory, I'm talking about a game called Saturday Morning RPG here, which was our first title. This was a RPG game set in a world inspired by 1980s Saturday morning cartoons. So the game is broken into episodes where this one is inspired by He-Man, this one's inspired by Transformers or whatever, and your progress, it carries through the episodes, and you can, go between them and play them in any order you want. So our real idea was, we'll give away that first episode, we'll hook people on that, then they'll buy the other episodes. But it turns out, the attention span on mobile is so short that people were like, hey, an hour of free gameplay is enough for me. I'm not going to buy anything else. And we ended up making about $4,000 on mobile. And with our investors taking 50% of that, we're left with, we've got to basically sustain our company on $2,000. And at that point, we can't fund another game. We can't make another original project. And, another trend we chased was this thing called the Ouya. And, I don't know how many people watching this know what the Ouya is, but around 2012, there was this Kickstarter for, the open game console. Anybody can develop games for it. At that point, it was hard to get a game on a console. To get a game on Wii or PS3 or whatever was difficult at the time. But the Ouya had this promise of anybody can release a game on it. So we chased that, and I think we ended up getting $1,000 on Ouya. So, those are just some of the trends we chased. And every time we chased a trend, it did not work out. So I feel like you've got to follow your own heart and follow your own passions, because if you're passionate about it, it means you're probably going to end up doing it right, and you're going to do it well, and you're going to see more success that way. Just don't chase trends. Don't chase, where you feel like the money is or whatever. Chase what drives you. Failure number 3 was not really knowing when to pull the plug. And I say this in reference to Saturday Morning RPG because we continued to work on that game for about, 5 years after the first release came out, and it didn't do well. We kept trying to revive it through other gimmicks, and it took an extremely long amount of time and effort and investment in both financial terms and time and opportunity costs to get that game to a point where it finally made money. Like, it's making money now because it's on Nintendo Switch, it's on PlayStation, it's had physical releases. Like, those things have made it money. But, in the lead up to that, like, we were losing all of this time that we could have been putting towards other projects, contract work, opportunities to make money. And I'm not saying that it wasn't necessarily worth it to get to the point where we are at now, but when you're really nose to the grindstone trying to keep your company in business, like, you've got to really evaluate where your opportunity cost is. And by opportunity cost, if you're not familiar with that, it's basically like, if you spend an hour to make $10 on something when you could have spent that hour making $30 somewhere else, like, obviously you should be chasing that opportunity to make $30, not, the opportunity to make 10, or in our case, like, basically, $0 an hour for so long. And really, we only started seeing success on Saturday Morning RPG after we did the limited run game side of it, which was a physical thing. So, without that component of it, like, it all would have been wasted time, really. So knowing when to pull the plug on something, even if you love it, you have to make a decision to focus on something else where you can get a better return on your time and a better return on your work. Failure number 4. So we're moving on to our next game here. Basically, this one applies to Breach and Clear, which was the next title we made after Saturday Morning RPG. So Breach and Clear is a tactical military strategy game. It's kind of simultaneous turn-based. Like, you plan an action and then the enemy's turn plays out at the same time as yours. And it was a really unique and cool game that we spent a long time building. But we were so desperate for work at the time that we massively undervalued ourselves. We built an entire game. That entire Breach and Clear experience was built for $60,000. And that might sound like a lot, but we had a team of like 8 people working for 11, 12 months to build that game. And originally it was supposed to be just, a vertical slice of a demo. Like, we were just supposed to make like 1 or 2 maps, but we were so desperate, so hungry for work, and so just, we wanted to stay in business, that we really undersold ourselves. And basically we all ended up working for, like, I was getting nothing every month. I had to do other things to, pay my bills. I ended up going massively into debt at this point in time. And most of my employees, I was paying them before myself. They were making $400 or $500 a month, and that was it. And that was a massive, massive undervalue of ourselves, because, when I looked at it later on, like, I saw what outsourced developers in, other countries were charging. And, we were like an eighth of the cost of somebody in like Eastern Europe to build a game. So like, we could have gone up way higher. And even if we were desperate, like, we still would have gotten that job. We still would have been, hired to build that game, because nobody else, would have built that game for as low as we did. And we didn't need to undervalue ourselves in that way. We really did not. So we should have put more effort into researching, what other people were charging, and building out a real bid instead of just, in our desperation, accepting the worst terms possible. Breach and Clear ended up making about $2 million or more for our partner. And we had no share in that. We had no revenue share. We had no stake in it whatsoever. We just got paid this $60,000, and then, we're kind of left to fend for ourselves after the completion of the project. And failure number 5, this kind of goes on to, Breach and Clear Deadline, which was the sequel to that. For Breach and Clear Deadline, our partner, they obviously saw success with the first game because they built it for $60,000 and made $2 million. So they wanted to make another game. And they decided the next game they were going to make was a zombie game. So they were chasing trends, because at the time, Last of Us had just come out. And they ended up kind of giving us a much bigger budget this time. Hindsight, it wasn't really that big. I know that, a lot of small developers now, like their budgets for indie games tend to be like $1 million, $1.5 million. And those are not unreasonable. Like those are small budgets. And we built Breach and Clear Deadline for $400,000. And at the time, I thought that was a massive amount of money, but it really wasn't. And we put all our chips in one basket, basically. Like we were all in on working with this one client that we had built Breach and Clear for, that we built Breach and Clear Deadline for, and that backfired. They basically, after Breach and Clear Deadline came out, they basically decided to not continue working with us. I think I talk about this in my next slide, but they basically wanted so much out of us, and we didn't fight back, that we ended up implementing everything because we were trying so hard to please everyone. We had 3 publishers on that game. They all wanted a different game. So Breach and Clear Deadline, if I had to describe it, it's a real-time turn-based, you can press a button and literally turn it between an action game or a turn-based tactical game where you have control over the flow of time. There's procedurally generated dungeons. There's a full loot system. There's a 40-hour single-player quest mode. There's drop-in, drop-out co-op. We actually removed that feature after a while because it wasn't functioning as well as we'd hoped, and the servers were costing us too much money to keep online. But we basically did everything. Procedural dungeons, open world, 40-hour story, loot system, customizable characters, skill, RPG progression, like you name it. If it was a feature at the time, we had it in there. And that was because every publisher that we had on this was asking for something different. And we tried to please them instead of fighting for a singular vision that would have made a better game. And, the game actually turned out surprisingly decent given how high the odds were stacked up against us. Because, the co-op, for example, here's an example of one of the problems we faced, one of the challenges. We were asked to put in online multiplayer into a game where people have control over the flow of time. It's like, how do you let one person control the flow of time if another person is playing with them? Like, they can't be out of sync. They can't be out of step. And the game also lets you choose between turn-based or real-time. So what if this guy's playing real-time and this guy's playing turn-based? We had to solve all these problems, and we had 11 months to do it in a tiny team. We're also building out a colossal amount of content for a 40-hour story mode. So, like, I'm surprised the game actually works as well as it does. But the game kind of, came out, got like a 69, 70 Metacritic score, not bad by all means. And our partner wasn't happy with it, and they ended up blaming us, and they didn't pick us to work on their next project. They wanted to work with somebody AAA, and they dumped us. They left us basically to fend for ourselves, and for lack of a better word, they left us to die. And they went on to work on Friday the 13th. They made tons and tons and tons of money, probably enough to fill a house. And we were faced with closure. We were basically about to be bankrupt. And that was all because we were trying to please them. And I think that's my next slide. Failure number 6. We really, really tried to please everyone. And that was a mistake. We should have been, fighting for our vision. We should have been pressing for what we wanted to see in the game and what we thought was best. We should have scaled it back to the game that we believed would work and fought for that. Because then the game would have turned out better. It would have been a much better game. It would have ended up, in the end, pleasing all of our publishers. Even if we had to fight them to get there, the game would have reviewed better. They would have had, a much better experience and go with this game. And who knows, at that point, maybe we would have been chosen to work on Friday the 13th. Maybe we could have, gone on to continue this relationship with them. But that was still a problem. Having put all of our chips into that basket with this partner, we didn't have any backup options. When things went south, we didn't have anybody else to turn to say, hey, we need work. Or, we didn't have something else going on in the company to work on and bring in money to continue funding what we were doing. So, I mean, if you're in a similar position, I would always recommend, trying to have multiple streams of cash flowing into your company, whether it's from, multiple contract works or multiple pieces of client work, or, just from games in your back catalog generating revenue. As long as you don't have, somebody taking 50% of that, just set up and establish multiple streams of cash flow so that if one of those streams suddenly goes dead, you're not in trouble. We were. That was our failure there, is, we didn't have multiple streams of cash flow. So when our partner disappeared, that was it for us. So where did we end up? After 5 years of grinding and really giving up everything to get to where we were, Mighty Rabbit Studios, we were on the brink of closure. Our clients had abandoned us. They had moved on to other people. We had no other work lined up, and we had very little money left in the bank. We had $10,000 left in the bank at the time. And, when you have 8 people, I think maybe actually 10 people at that time, when you have 10 people on your payroll, $10,000 really isn't going to go very far. I mean, it was kind of shocking, but that would last us about a month, and it was very scary. I actually, like I said at the start of the talk, I called everybody into our lobby at our office at the time. I think our office was maybe 700 square feet or something. We all sat down, and I told them, like, hey, we're going out of business. There's no way out of this, really. I think everyone should line up other work and, just be prepared to just say goodbye. And what ended up happening was, all of my employees, save for like 1 or 2 that really, needed the money. I think it was just 1 actually. All of my employees believed in the company, and they all decided to go down with the ship. And that was, really inspiring to me. I wasn't completely prepared to give up. I had an idea in my back pocket, and I decided that it was worth pursuing that to try to keep my employees and friends going and to keep my company rolling. So we pressed on, and despite all the past failures and despite the fact that we were on the brink of bankruptcy, I took a huge personal loan out, $85,000, really, really bad terms, like horrible terms. Like, I would lose my house, my car, everything. I would be I don't even want to think about where I would be if that didn't work out. But I took that to keep people working and to pursue this idea that I had in the back of my head. And that idea, that was limited run games. So we had, like, the bone that our partner had thrown us on Breach and Clear was, they said, if you want, you can make a Vita version of it, and we'll let you do what you want with the Vita version. And if you're familiar with the Vita, it's a handheld console from Sony that a lot of people really love, but it really didn't do well. It sold very few units. It was very neglected in the marketplace, and there was basically no prospects. If we were going to release a game for it, we were going to make basically nothing. So this was barely a consolation prize. But we decided to port the game to PlayStation Vita, and I've always been a collector of physical items. And as a developer, I've always wanted to see my game in a box because it gives it a legacy. Like, when you think about Nintendo, people still talk about, like, even the worst games on Nintendo now, because they're physical, they trade hands, people go back and experience them. But these games that we had spent 5 years building and be closing the doors on forever, these games only existed digitally. And I was scared that at some point, and this almost happened like last month, that Sony might shut down the platforms that host them, or they may disappear from the App Store. And these things have happened. Saturday Morning RPG disappeared from iOS, and the PlayStation Vita store was about to go down. Breach and Clear even disappeared from iOS and Android for quite a while. So, digital games are not permanent. So I was worried that, all of these games that we had sacrificed huge amounts of our lives to build and, poured all of our souls into, they may just disappear. So I really wanted to take this game that we had ported to PlayStation Vita and just make it physical. And that was more for myself than anything else. But I kind of hoped in the back of my head that there would be other collectors that might feel like, yeah, I'd like to own this too. Like, I don't really like digital games, so give me a game in a box. And I hope that, if this did well, we could spin it into a full company and help other people develop. So one of my employees at Mighty Rabbit, my best friend, Douglas Bogart, actually joined on with me, like moved from Mighty Rabbit to Limited Run Games to start pushing this Breach and Clear physical release, while I had my employees at Mighty Rabbit start developing ports of Breach and Clear Deadline to console, because we were also able to negotiate those rights, because at the time, it had come out, nobody really cared about it anymore. In fact, they were kind of bitter at us for it. So they were just like, whatever, have it, we don't really care. So I figured, anything is better than nothing. I got people working on that. And then Douglas started kind of marketing the physical Breach and Clear. And what ended up working out, was this physical release thing. Breach and Clear, when we released it on Vita, we did 1,500 copies, and every single copy of the game sold out in under 2 hours. And, in a flash, my personal passion for collecting physical games was vindicated. And this idea of releasing games physically was also, proven and vindicated. And the company was saved. Under 2 hours, the company's fortunes turned around, and Mighty Rabbit went from brink of bankruptcy to back in business. And from there, we were able to just work with other developers, other partners, other publishers, and help them release their games physically. We have worked with, over the last 6 years almost at this point, we've worked with some amazing games that I never thought that I would have the opportunity to touch. Like, I've released Star Wars games. I've worked with Sony and Naughty Dog. Even early on, our second game release, our third game release was with Oddworld. This was a game that came out on PlayStation 1. It was legendary. And, barely even proven as a company, Limited Run Games got to touch that. And, it took no time at all, but I was able to pay off that, that huge personal loan that I took within about, I think, like 5 months. I think by like our 10th release, I had been able to pay that back off. And, Mighty Rabbit Studios was funded for the foreseeable future, and Limited Run Games was, rolling strong as its own thing. And here's a little comparison, then and now. In 2015, we had $10,000 left in the bank, but by mid-2020, Limited Run Games, we'd crossed over $100 million in sales. And that's insane to think about, going from $10,000 in the bank, basically about to shut down, to just this insane success. And I was about to give up, I was so close to completely just shutting the door on this company and shutting the door on what we were doing. But success was literally right around the corner. And if I had given up there, like, none of this would exist. None of this would be as it is. And, the success of Limited Run led to further work for Mighty Rabbit. We were able to kind of diversify what we're doing. And Mighty Rabbit's now financially independent and well set to continue for the future. So, Mighty Rabbit's going to be around for, 15, 20, 30 years, whatever. We're going to continue going along because we've been able to continue working because, pursuing actual passion project, really worked out for us. And I didn't put it on this slide here, but Limited Run Games has actually, managed to place on, there's a list called the Inc. 5000, which, they measure the most successful companies in America. And we've been on that list for the last 2 years in a row. We were the 34th most successful company in the US in 2019. And in 2020, I think we were like 234 or whatever. But it's kind of crazy to think, we went from literally almost shutting the door and closing down everything to being on this list of successful companies. And it's really been a wild ride. But at any point, I could have closed because of those failures. I could have shut down, and it would have been terrible, I think, if that had happened. So what has Mighty Rabbit been up to? Since then, Mighty Rabbit has gone on to work on Wasteland 3 and The Bard's Tale 4, where we've basically just been doing contract work within Exile. I've been so focused on Limited Run that I haven't really been able to put my effort, because I love to design. I haven't really been able to put my effort on design into a new game or a new IP. So I've really had to, focus the company on working with other people. So we've been working with In Exile, which is a division of Microsoft during that time, and we've gotten to work on some incredible games. Wasteland 3, I think, has like an 86 or 87 on Metacritic. Bard's Tale 4 was pretty praised as well. So it's been an honor to be a part of those. And that's it. So that's it for my presentation, and I am going to move on to questions now.
Hey there. All right. So let's get some questions. How's it going, Josh? That was a great presentation. Let's see here. First question. Swatakeda, Logan Holt, can you describe the process indie devs go through to get their games to have physical releases through limited run games?
Sure. So we usually start the process. Developer will either reach out to us or we will reach out to them. We usually reach out if it's a game that we've played ourselves and we really like. But more often than not, we get emails from developers or DMs on Twitter or wherever we can get in touch with, and they ask us to check out their games, and we'll play them and kind of evaluate whether they're a strong fit. And if they are, we are able to basically handle everything on our side in terms of getting the physical part of it to exist. So we work with the developers and our partners directly to take their game from digital to physical. There's a lot of steps, and they're different with each platform holder, but we've got an engineer on staff who walks everybody through those steps or handles them himself if our partners don't want to. We have an in-house creative team, so those are artists. They will piece together collector's editions, so they'll come up with the ideas, the design, the layout for all of our collector's editions, and they'll actually handle the production process as well, so that can be as wide-reaching as reaching out to suppliers for obscure things like trying to think of something obscure that we've done recently. I don't really have anything around me, but for Jack and Daxter, when we worked with Naughty Dog, we had to do this little metal precursor orb, which was a little collectible in the game. So my art team, they'll source these components and bring them into reality. And they'll also, work with the printing partners. We actually work with local printers, and they work with them to produce the packaging, the design, and everything that goes into having that beautiful boxed product that we release. And we typically, we have a revenue share with our partners, and we've always weighted it to our partners make the majority of the money for anything we do, and that will never change because limited runs started from a place where I was struggling and about to go out of business. So it helped me survive. And I see this as a service for other developers so they can help, so they can continue to survive and thrive as well. So, we're always weighted towards helping our partners as much as we can rather than helping ourselves.
That's good stuff right there. Because that really, that helps out the industry in general, when you work like that. Here's a question from Jennifer Winter. Question for Josh. What has Microsoft done to deter you from publishing on the Xbox family?
Sure. So we've been able to publish digitally on Xbox through their ID at Xbox program. But, when we've tried doing physical product on Xbox, they always try to push it through ID at Xbox. And there's no real defined pathway to go physical with ID at Xbox, because ID at Xbox is kind of considered this, like, metaphorically, I kind of consider it like the kids' table at like a meal at like an adult's party or whatever. Like you got the adults sitting at the real dinner table, and then you've got kids sitting at the kid table. I feel like ID at Xbox is the kid table. Like they don't give us access to all of the things that they give everybody else access to. And for some reason, like despite having worked on things like, Star Wars and Power Rangers and all these big games and brands, like they just relegate us to this smaller table, even though they could just kind of give us a full publishing deal and, put us in at the regular table. And, it's just been a somewhat frustrating experience. I can't blame anybody that we know at Xbox, because they've all been really great to talk to. And the people at ID at Xbox are fantastic and wonderful, and they really do help indies. But I feel like we're being kind of put into the wrong place at Microsoft, and there's never been, a path out of that.
All right, here's another good one. Did you make your company right after college, or did you get a job before you started your own company?
So I started my own company right after college, but I had gotten a job during college. So I worked at Epic as a tester on Gears of War 2 while I was a junior in college. That was a really difficult experience just because, crunch on a AAA game can be brutal. And it's kind of it's an unfortunate thing that happens when you have a big game, millions of dollars into it, and there's a release date to meet. But we ended up having to work about 90-hour weeks for 2.5 months, and I was doing that while I was in college. So I kind of got my experience in the game industry before I had graduated. So by the time I graduated, I kind of was ready to just kind of jump into starting my own company.
Right, that's a lot of hours. That I actually have a tattoo of a
Oh,
locust right there. See it?
yep, yep.
Nerdy biker. Okay, here we go. This is a really good one. CJ Kirshner. Platform holders are pushing away from physical releases towards digital only and streaming, even stripping optical drives from certain hardware models. What's the plan for when/if it's completely removed?
Sure. So this is something. I mean, we've thought about this a lot because I do feel like the future is going to be things like Game Pass and cloud gaming, and I really I hate to say that as a lover of physical items, but I think it's kind of inevitable that within the next 10, 15 years, like cloud gaming and xCloud and Game Pass is going to be a thing. Like I don't even think Xbox itself is going to really be a platform anymore. I just think Game Pass is going to be on everything. Like, Game Pass on your computer, Game Pass on your TV, like whatever device will just be able to pull it up and stream from a huge library of games. Like that's really what I feel like the future is going to be. It's just like on demand games whenever you want, wherever you want, from whatever device. But I kind of feel like Nintendo, they don't really follow trends. They're going to kind of, I think, cling to physical media for years beyond everybody else. So I kind of feel like there's kind of a healthy future for physical beyond Sony and Microsoft with Nintendo. I think that they've got another 2-3 generations where they're still going to have physical integrated into their devices. So we're going to just kind of ride that out, and we're going to see where things go. But one of the things we've been doing at Limited Run is we're kind of diversifying, some of the stuff that we're doing. We've been developing an in-house engine that we're calling the Carbon engine, which is an emulation engine, which is really going to help our partners just, very easily and cost-free bring their back catalog games to modern platforms. So, we're going to continue building this out. And we see this as kind of a big piece of our business, going forward, is that we're going to help developers and publishers continue to have their games out on whatever platform, for years to come. So that's kind of a big piece of the puzzle for us. I also think that, there's enough demand for physical media that, like, if the major platform holders shun it, some other company is going to build a device. There's something called the Evercade on the market right now, which is, kind of a physical focused device. And I can kind of see somebody taking that concept even further and, building a device solely around the idea of physical media just because they're frustrated and angry that the main platform holders got rid of it. So, I kind of feel like there's still going to be a strong market for us for years to come.
And even with like digital media, I mean, like people like collectibles and limited edition stuff. It just goes to show your shelves behind you, right?
Yep.
All right. So this right here is a comment, and I would like to get your thoughts on it here. This is from Stats 2002. Microtransactions should be illegal. They encourage gambling. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think to an extent there are microtransactions that lean way too heavily into gambling, loot boxes and things like that. Um, I don't personally have a problem with like microtransactions where they're like, it's a single player game and, if somebody wants to like pay for a cheat or whatever. I think it's stupid that, they charge for cheats these days or whatever, but like, I don't think things that like impact single player games are really that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. But I'm not a big fan of the idea of like digital loot boxes. I think in general, spending money on digital things is kind of it's a weird thing for me to wrap my head around because you can always lose access to that. Like, you could spend thousands upon thousands of dollars buying like skins and stuff in CS:GO, and in 10, 15 years, like you might not be able to use those anymore because the game might not be running. It might not be available anymore. And it's like, I guess if you got your fun out of it, if you enjoyed it and you feel like it was worth the $1,500, then great. But you got nothing to show for it down the line. And I think that's, to me, that's scary.
Yeah. Yeah. So how long do you think CSGO is going to last? You think like they're going to shut down the servers in 20 years or?
I don't particularly know. It's just, I just feel like the march of time has shown me that people do, like, something can be really popular today. And then, all it takes one thing coming along that, is better in some way. And then people just abandon the other thing. It's like, look at MySpace 2004, whenever everyone was like, this is great. Nobody's ever going to stop using MySpace. And, now we're all on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and MySpace is dead. So,
yeah. Well, it's not dead. There's still people on it, I guess. I've heard. That's what I heard from 1980. Here we go. Another question from Jennifer. In your view, is the current implementation of VR a trend, or is it finally here to stay?
I think VR still has a little bit of a ways to go. I think that it could have pretty broad appeal. My father-in-law is a big fan of his Oculus. I got him an Oculus Quest. And not having to have that hooked up to external hardware, I think, is a game changer. It makes it so much easier for other people to use. And my father-in-law is one of those people that you put a dual stick controller in his hand, like he's going to spend half the time looking at the ceiling because he doesn't have the dexterity to, control two control sticks at once. But when you've got the Quest, you've got these like wand controllers, like he's able to do it. And it's like, it's unlocked the world of gaming for him. So, to a degree, I think that, VR is closer than it's ever been to, really being a permanent thing and being here. But I think like, we're still a couple years removed from like, it really being completely mainstream and big. Cause it's got to get to the point where it's like, the Wii, where people are buying tens of millions of units of the hardware for it to really, break through. I'm a personal believer that I think AR might end up being a bigger thing than VR at some point, but that's going to come down to, contacts that, can overlay UI and stuff. And I think we're a ways off from AR being, a huge thing yet, but I do feel like augmented reality is going to be kind of the biggest thing in that space.
I've got the old Oculus where everything's plugged in, and then you got to have the sensors. And man, the whole reason we didn't use it as much is because it's a pain in the butt to take down and put back up. But I think like the smaller and smaller VR gets, where you can just put it in a little bag and you can carry it on an airplane and just like put it on, and it's not like this great big old huge thing, but just like a little, I think that and then your hand controls will just be, I don't know, something really. Maybe even gloves or something. I don't know. Something that is smaller than what they have right now.
The Vive was insane about, the setup, having to put those little like laser things up in the corner, and then,
it's a pain.
All these wires everywhere, these like stands. It was like once we moved our offices, like the Vive never got set up again. It was just like, we don't have the time, to set this thing up again. It's just going to kind of sit in a box somewhere.
Yeah, that's what's going on. My Oculus is just sitting right here, just sitting there. The last time I tried to hook it up, it wouldn't even work. All right, so it's from CJ Kirshner again. In the PS3/3 Xbox 360 era, getting a platform certification was crushingly expensive, which made launching anything other than a major title nearly impossible, and that cost applied to patches as well. If you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, so the good thing is that neither Nintendo nor Sony nor Microsoft charges for certification anymore. So I think that's really how consoles have opened up so much at this point, is that, it's basically free to publish on them outside of purchasing a dev kit. And with my, in my experience, like these companies actually have ways for you to get dev kits for free even. So Sony's especially good about that. When we were starting to bring Breach and Clear to the Vita, for example, they sent us our dev hardware for free, and it was no strings attached, really. We signed an agreement, they sent it out, and that really enabled us. Like without that, like we wouldn't be where we are. So I can't really say how helpful that was. It was insane. And we've never had to pay for any patches or certification or anything of that matter. So it's really great how consoles have opened up. It's really kind of expanded how many places indies can reach with their games.
All right, let's see. Here's another good question from Jennifer Winner again. Is there some guidelines or proverbial formula for that opportunity / sunk cost to determine when you throw in the towel, or is it just something that comes from experience?
Yeah, so in my case, the need to throw in the towel, I think, was fairly obvious from the start. When our first sales came back on mobile, and we had only earned about $4,000 from the game, like that was the point where it should have been clear, like, hey, there's got to be better things for us to focus our time on right now than a game that's only going to generate this much money, because there's only so much you can do to really change your game around. You really get like one chance to launch your game, and typically you'll see, revenue wise, unless you're Among Us, like your revenue at launch is like the biggest you're ever going to get, like outside of just like a crazy streamer picking up on it later, or some freak accident like really causing it to shoot up the charts. Like that launch is like your one shot. So if your launch goes bad, it's usually a pretty clear indicator that you've done something wrong, and that there might not be a way back from that. But the good thing about having all these other platforms available now is that you basically get all these different opportunities to launch. Like if you do poorly on your first platform, you can try to make some adjustments or changes on your next. So I can't necessarily say that my experience with Saturday Morning RPG is kind of a one size fits all. But I think that there's a general feeling you can get between critical analysis of your game, reviews, and then the revenue that you get on whether or not like it's worth continuing to pursue it and really trying to push it through.
Okay, we've got a question here from Justin Howard. What are the things to keep in mind when budgeting for a game project? Get as much money as you can.
Yeah. So, whenever you come up with your first budget, triple it. And that's what you actually need. That's really the best advice I can give you, because your first budget is never going to be what you actually are going to need. And even when we were building games for clients, we would find out very, very quickly that the money we were due to get was not going to cover everything. So we'd be, 3 months into an 11-month project, and we'd realize that like we need to make cuts to our own pay, or to, whatever our plans were, to make sure that we got through with the budget that we had. So I would just say, always be willing to go high on your estimates. Don't go low, because you're going to end up needing a lot more. You always will hit unexpected wrenches in development that will cause you to have to spend money to fix those things, or completely rebuild systems that didn't work. Like there's always surprises. So you have to account for those.
So I've always been told that the amount of money that you need for development, you should also have that much money for marketing. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's true. So marketing is tricky. We got lucky with Saturday Morning RPG in that, I had found somebody at ECGC, that, in-person event back in like 2012, before times, who ended up being extremely excited about trying to do marketing for games. So he came on the team and like helped us get a lot of press coverage. So we actually got a lot of coverage for Saturday Morning RPG, to the point where like our free-to-play downloads, like we got like 200,000 downloads or whatever. The game just monetized horribly. I think, you don't want to throw a whole bunch of money into marketing unless you understand what you're doing. So, if you do set aside a budget for marketing, make sure like you actually have somebody on your team that like understands how to spend that well. Because otherwise you're just going to spend money like throwing it into a Facebook, promotion or campaign that could just drain your money with no effective results. Like you need somebody analyzing like analytics, doing A/B testing and all this stuff to, really evaluate if your spending is actually meaningful and making an impact.
All right, let's see here. We've got here we go. What do you have to say about the development of Cuphead?
So I don't know a whole lot about how everything went for Studio MDHR, but that game kind of, came out of the gates and just set the world on fire. Like, and I have no idea. It's like one of those things like Shovel Knight, where it's like, I saw that game before it really, caught on, and I was like, this game looks really awesome. It's going to appeal to hardcore gamers, that like really hard retro gamers, and I thought that'd really be it. But then, Shovel Knight came out, and it was this huge mainstream hit, and it's like sometimes, the right games hit at the right time and scratch the right itches, and then they end up being huge successes because Cuphead looks beautiful, it looks amazing, but like I don't hear a lot of people under the age of like 60 or 50 talking about like Fleischer animation or whatever, like 1930s animation. So it's like, I don't know. If somebody had described the game to me before it came out, like they're like, oh, it's like 1930s animation, I would have been like, okay, all right, cool, or whatever. But I never would have thought that something inspired by like Popeye animation or whatever would have been the biggest indie hit of the decade.
It's a crazy good game, and it's all boss fights.
Yeah.
All boss fights.
I wouldn't expect a game that like is such a huge hit to be so ridiculously difficult. Also,
I am horrible at it. I am so terrible. All right, so here we go from Master Silver, and we got time for probably one or two more questions. So taking into consideration about how difficult it is working with publishers and getting work, is it viable and feasible to come up with your own original title and just publish it independent?
Yeah, so I mean, it really comes down to, there are a lot of publishers out there, and some of them are a lot better than others. We were looking for deals on Saturday Morning RPG. We talked to like everybody we could. Namco, Atari, trying to remember all the people we talked to, but we went through a laundry list, and some of them had really, really horrible deals. And you really just have to analyze the kind of deals and terms that they're offering, because sometimes, there are publishers like Devolver who are amazing. Like they fund games, they don't take a whole lot of money, like they let the creators control, so many of the different aspects of the game.
And their library is amazing. Yeah. And they don't have one bad game, in my opinion.
You get to alongside all of these other incredibly good games, and that adds something to your game's value or whatever. Like they really do bring that value. But then there are a lot of publishers whose names like I couldn't even name, and I work with hundreds of publishers, but there are still like publishers on Steam that I couldn't name if I wanted to, and like their strategy is to just sign as many games as they can, throw it at the wall, and see what sticks, and like they don't bring a real value. So like you have to really think about like, is this publisher I'm talking to bringing a real value? And if they don't, you are better off publishing it yourself. But if you publish it yourself, that's really when like you need to make sure you know how to market it, because you can have the best game in the world, but if nobody can find it, nobody's going to find it.
No one will buy it for sure.
They can't find
there is a lot of value in publishers for sure, but like with Devolver, as a content creator, I know that if I get an email from Devolver, it's going to be a good game, right? You get an email from some other company and you're like, oh, they have maybe some good or some bad games or whatever. But you know what? This is actually, we don't have time for another question, but thank you so much, Josh, for coming on here. If you want to continue the conversation, everybody, you can go to discord.gg/indiegamebusiness. You can hang out there if you want to, Josh. There's a channel in there called Career Sessions Chat. If you wanted to hang out in there, there's also, it looks like there's something going on in the Career and Portfolio. There's a live stream channel going on there. Something's happening. But yeah, thank you so much. We've got another great, amazing talk coming up next. Do you have any final words?
No, just, don't give up if you fail. That's really the big thing. Just,
learn from it.
Keep striving. Learn from your failure. Don't let it, grind you down,
All right. Don't let it grind you down. I like that. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Josh.
Take it easy.